From 1966 to 1968, dozens of American naval vessels that included powerful destroyers, cruisers, and even battleships operated aggressively in the waters off North Vietnam with the mission of disrupting the enemy's supply lines and sinking communist freighter ships that carried vital resources for the war effort. As the Vietnam War grew in scale, complexity, and seriousness, the United States increased its involvement by offering more assistance to South Vietnam, which meant the number and difficulty of the tasks assigned to the Navy expanded rapidly. Operation Sea Dragon, which lasted for nearly 2 years, became one of the most significant naval undertakings of the war. Task Force 77 of the U.S. Navy, which carried out the operation, ultimately fired 13,976 rounds, sank 483 targets, and damaged more than 1,000 others, making the seas around North Vietnam far more dangerous for communist transport vessels. During the war, the North Vietnamese relied on 3 main routes to move personnel and supplies to the south. The most famous of these was the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a vast and complex underground network of roads and trails that stretched through the mountains and carried troops, weapons, and equipment into South Vietnam. The second route used the rivers and roads across the northern coastal plains south of the Red River Delta, where supplies could be moved as part of a logistic feeder system to connect with hidden subterranean channels. The third route passed through the coastal waters of the Gulf of Tonkin, off the coast of northern Vietnam and southern China, and although it was less publicized than the Ho Chi Minh Trail, it was equally crucial in sustaining the Communist war effort. The United States knew that the North Vietnamese were heavily dependent on the large quantities of supplies moved across South Vietnam's shores and waterways, and so, in 1966, U.S. Pacific Command's Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Ulysses S. Grant Sharp, Jr., proposed a plan to interfere with this supply flow. He submitted the idea to the Joint Chiefs of Staff under the name Traffic Cop, and it called for the interdiction of enemy supply vessels below the Vietnamese demilitarized zone. Months of debate followed in Washington, with concerns about escalation and political consequences, but eventually, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara gave approval in October of 1966 for destroyers to begin operating above the 17th parallel. Even then, there were limits placed on the engagement rules. Counter-battery fire against enemy artillery was only allowed in and North Vietnamese civilian fishing boats were to remain immune from attack. On the morning of October 25, 1966, the destroyers USS Mansfield and USS Hanson received their official orders to patrol the North Vietnamese coastline from the demilitarized zone northward, and to destroy any North Vietnamese waterborne logistics craft carrying arms and materials. 2 enemy troops fighting in the south. Before dawn, both destroyers sailed north toward the 17th parallel, fully aware that they were entering hostile waters where danger was imminent. Soon after, the mission was renamed Operation Sea Dragon, a title that would come to symbolize an aggressive and persistent naval campaign against communist supply routes. At 5 o'clock that morning, the 7th Fleet's destroyers and a group of cruisers, joined by vessels from the Royal Australian Navy, officially entered North Vietnamese waters, marking the start of a new and more intense naval phase of the Vietnam War. Their job was to intercept and destroy WBLC logistic craft that ranged from small wooden sampans to large steel-hulled barges capable of carrying heavy cargo. In addition, they were tasked with attacking Soviet-supported coastal lines of communication, which included radar stations, boat repair depots, bridges, and missile sites that supported the enemy's coastal defense. After nearly 5 hours of sailing through enemy-controlled waters, the 2 American warships came within 14,000 yards of the coast near the city of Dong Hoi by mid-morning. At 9:51 a.m., North Vietnamese coastal batteries opened fire on them. The USS Mansfield and USS Hanson immediately maneuvered into the open sea while returning fire with their powerful, after-mounted 5-inch guns. Despite the intensity of the attack, both destroyers emerged unscathed, and after silencing the batteries, they continued firing at other enemy targets. By sunset, the ships had already destroyed several logistics craft and exchanged fire with shore defenses multiple times, demonstrating the determination of the American Navy to carry the fight directly to the enemy's coastline. The very next day, North Vietnamese representatives lodged a formal complaint to the International Control Commission at the United Nations, accusing the United States of escalating the conflict, but these protests had little effect, and Operation Sea Dragon continued relentlessly for nearly 2 years. In the first week alone, destroyers assigned to the mission sank 101 watercraft and damaged 94 more, all with their 5-inch projectiles. In addition, counter-battery fire resulted in the expenditure of another 426 shells. Yet not a single American ship or sailor was lost. Life aboard these vessels, however, was not easy. Sailors lived under constant stress, as the threat of shore batteries, mines, or sudden ambushes was ever present. The cramped quarters, the humid climate, and the long periods of vigilance created difficult conditions, but morale remained surprisingly high. This was largely because the sailors could see immediate results from their actions. Whether it was watching an enemy craft go up in flames, or knowing that their bombardments disrupted critical supply lines. Veterans later recalled that these victories gave them confidence and a sense of purpose in the midst of an otherwise grueling campaign. Tom Harper, one of the sailors, recounted how every time they lit a smoke pot, one crew member in the aft repair party used a cigar to ignite it. The smoke would cause confusion for the enemy, and the propaganda broadcasts from Hanoi would then claim the ship had been hit. Harper noted with satisfaction that although the North Vietnamese claimed several hits, the crew knew they had managed to cheat the enemy out of those victories. Operation Sea Dragon was a massive naval effort. Typically, Task Force 77 organized the operation with 1 cruiser and 4 destroyers divided into separate units. But at the height of the attacks in May 1967, as many as 2 cruisers and 12 destroyers were committed simultaneously. With the waterborne traffic severely disrupted, the North Vietnamese shifted more of their supplies to the roads and rivers in the southern regions of North Vietnam. In response, the American government expanded the mission's scope to include the bombardment of inland supply depots and military positions. These bombardments were far more dangerous, as the American ships came under fire from numerous camouflaged coastal artillery batteries, while aircraft supporting the missions faced continuous threats from surface-to-air missiles and dense anti-aircraft fire. Every strike meant exposing the fleet to counterattacks, and crews lived with the knowledge that at any moment they could come under deadly fire. Despite the risks, Operation Sea Dragon achieved significant disruption of enemy logistics. During the 1967-1968 Lunar New Year, known as Tet, both sides agreed to a temporary truce. In just 6 days of the ceasefire, more than 1,300 North Vietnamese logistics craft took advantage of the lull to move supplies. At the same time, Communist forces prepared for and launched the Tet Offensive, one of the largest and most coordinated military campaigns of the entire war. This offensive marked a turning point in global perceptions of the conflict, but it also underscored the importance of earlier operations, like Sea Dragon, which had forced the North Vietnamese to constantly adapt their supply strategies in the face of relentless American naval power. U.S. forces were taken off guard by the Tet Offensive, which contradicted the Johnson administration's assertions that Communist forces were weak, close to defeat, and incapable of mounting a major operation. Because of the surprise attack, many Sea Dragon units were pulled back from the demilitarized zone to provide gunfire support to besieged formations in South Vietnam's the First Corps tactical zone. Once the situation stabilized, those naval units returned to patrol and interdict in the northern waters. By April 1968, U.S. Pacific Command ordered a reduction of Operation Sea Dragon's functional area to below the 19th parallel, about 150 miles north of the demilitarized zone, as sightings of waterborne logistic craft diminished and demands for ships further south increased after Tet. Despite that drawdown, the campaign pressed on through the summer of 1968 with continued shore bombardments. Between August and September, the heavy cruiser, Newport News, and 3 accompanying destroyers sank or damaged nearly 1,000 watercraft. On September 29th, USS New Jersey, an Iowa-class battleship that had been inactive since the Korean War, rejoined the fleet. With her 16-inch guns, she could reach a large portion of military targets in the north. On her first day, she destroyed a supply depot, a barracks area, several roads, nearly 1,000 feet of occupied trench lines, and an anti-aircraft battery that had tried to engage an F-4 Phantom. Communist gunners frequently abandoned positions as soon as they sighted the battleship rather than risk its overwhelming firepower. For about a month, the world's only active battleship operated alongside the Sea Dragon force, striking fortified caves, logistic complexes, watercraft, troop concentrations, and important bridges with her heavy guns. Although waterborne logistic traffic had been dense early in the operation, around 50 sightings per day. Very few watercraft were being spotted by early fall of 1968. On October 31, 1968, President Johnson ordered a halt to all military operations in Vietnam, and the Sea Dragon vessels withdrew from the demilitarized zone. Coastal interdiction and bombardments resumed intermittently in later years, but never again reached the scale of Operation Sea Dragon. In just 2 years, the task force fired 13,976 rounds, sank 483 targets, and damaged more than 1,000 others. Those targets included watercraft, shore structures, bridges, trucks, storage sites, and radar installations. North Vietnamese forces fired on Sea Dragon vessels 169 times, and 38 ships received enemy fire on more than one occasion. Despite increasingly accurate shore artillery, coastal defense batteries never managed to put a Sea Dragon ship out of commission. Ultimately, Sea Dragon operations suffered 5 killed and 26 wounded. Although the campaign did not completely stop the flow of men and materiel to the south, it forced the Communists to divert much of their logistics to less efficient land routes, such as the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which became the primary supply artery because of naval interdictions. Eliminating large-scale coastal deliveries also compelled North Vietnam to commit tens of thousands of troops to defend the coast, rely more on smaller inland rivers and connecting channels to move goods, and use mountain routes and manual transport to get munitions and provisions to forces south of the demilitarized zone. Thank you for watching the Black Vault channel. If you know of a story you'd like to see in a future video, please let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified of our newest content. **